It's April 15th, 2022. I'm Sonatina, and this is Linguistics You Can Use. Perception. What does it mean to take in information and process it as knowledge? How do our senses influence our perception? That is the subject for today's episode. So, perception. Like in many uh, episodes on Linguistics You Can Use, if you have joined us before, you may know we often check out our dictionaries to see what this word means to our culture at different times. Let's look at how perception is perceived in our current time through the wonderful dictionary that is the Merriam-Webster online dictionary. All right, so here we have the entry for perception. It is a noun. It has four? How many definitions does it have? Four definitions. So, the way that dictionaries tend to define words is by breaking them up into what is known as a sense of a word. So in this particular word, we're looking at perception. And Merriam-Webster dictionary writers tell us that there are four different senses of this word. And it's interesting that the word that is used to delineate each different meaning of this word is the word that we use to do that is sense, i.e., how we perceive the world, So let's look at perception and the four senses that it makes up. We have one, a result of perceiving observation, a mental image, concept. So the first sense has two definitions within it. The second one is obsolete, which means consciousness, apparently. So it's interesting. And this is something to perhaps look up in the future as why would the second entry, the second sense that they want to tell us about, why would they put an obsolete definition of that word? So next we look at the third sense. The first definition of this sense is awareness of the elements of environment. Sorry about that. Awareness of the elements of environment through physical sensation. Color perception. So how do you personally perceive color based on the environment and your physical sensations? The second definition in the third sense is physical sensation interpreted in the light of experience. This sounds a lot like what I would think of when I would be using the word perceive or perception, in my daily use. Now there's the fourth sense. We have there's two definitions for this sense as well. The first sense is quick, acute, and intuitive cognition, which leads us to appreciation. And the second definition in this fourth sense is a capacity for comprehension. So, out of these four senses of what perception means to us now, what does it say to you about how this word should be used in our lives? Is it a word that you use on a regular basis? Is this your first introduction to the word? And why do you think it's important to look into what this word means to us? So, another way that we examine words in our use is through etymology. And in etymology, we look at the history of the word. So, going to Webster's, right, we looked at what the word means to us right now in our culture. And according to this particular dictionary and these particular dictionary writers, this word perception has 4 different senses. And you might be familiar with 1 or 2 or maybe all. But that also means that somebody you're interacting with, somebody who might not have their primary definition as the same one as yours, and it could cause some kind of miscommunication, perhaps, because you're using the same word and you're defining it in the same, with the same resource even. And yet, with 4 different senses of how we interpret, how this word becomes a conscious piece of, you know, language for us to trade with each other. There's 4 different ways that we can take it in and give it out, right? And if the people who are engaged in that conversation aren't sharing the same perception, then it could cause some miscommunication. So I find it valuable to just see, well, what are some of the other ways that people may interpret this? And just because what the dictionary's writers have in the online right now, right? That is the most current version of what these dictionary writers believe that the majority, or like how we are using this word currently in the culture. That doesn't necessarily mean, though, that somebody still living in our culture isn't using this word in a way that it used to be used. And so that adds in another element of potential miscommunication because, once again, if we're not clear on how we're using the words with each other, there's a great chance that we are going to be confused about the goals of the conversation. And however you want to define goals of the conversation is on you, but generally we do have a purpose, a reason for engaging with each other in conversation, even if it's just for having fun, just for with catching up with a friend. There's a goal there that's we want to make or have a good experience. There's a goal of fun. There's a goal of having a good memory from hanging out with a friend. And that might be a subconscious goal. It still has an influence on how we interact with each other. So while one friend may have a goal of, engaging in a conversation for fun, just, because we have time to hang out, another friend might be coming into a conversation to accomplish a goal, a task, an actual objective, because There's something going on in their life and they need help, and if there's not a understanding between the two that they have different goals, even if both of them want to have a good experience, that's a primary goal always with people who are hanging out. I like to assume that the details of that particular moment of engagement makes a difference. So, as I said, when we look at how our perception of language, how our perception of how we are using language changes, we can perhaps help ease some miscommunication moments a little bit easier. So let's look at the history, a bit of the history of perception. So here we see that this word is a noun, as again, they like to define, where does it fit into the grammar of our language? Well, this one is from the late 14th century, it says. So, perception sounds like Latin. Understanding, a taking cognizance. That's a new word. Relates to cognition, I believe. A noun of action from past participle stem perspire to perceive, see perceive, also used in Middle English in the more literal sense of the Latin word. The meaning intuitive or direct recognition of some innate quality is from 1827. So, as I'm reading through this history on etymology, etymonline.com, I am taking in information that this is a pretty old word in our English language. So it has had time to develop a lot of meanings beyond perhaps what is literally written down in a dictionary. And that's always important. And you'll hear dictionary writers talk about this all the time. The dictionary is a reflection of the culture when the dictionary writer was gathering resources about that word. And it changes every year, every 10, 15. Words have their own life. Some are very stable and some change within a generation. Some are stable for a long, long time, and then within a generation, there's a shift, and suddenly a word that had one meaning suddenly has the opposite meaning. And so, again, the value of looking at the history of a word and how others might interpret it, perceive it, quite important. So here we see the entry for perceive. And this one comes around 1300, a little bit earlier. Become aware of, gain knowledge of, especially to come to know by direct experience. So, this is an interesting one. So in the second paragraph I see here, it replaced Old English en guitan. Both the Latin senses were in Old French, though English uses the word almost always in the metaphorical sense. Related, perceived, perceiving. The past tense and active action. So, and then we have a little bit of a bonus down here. We have imperception, want of perception from 1620. Assimilated form of in, not opposite of. So, you don't have perception, you want perception. So, looking at the history of perception and how it came to the language that I am currently using, and most likely you are as well as you are watching this. Perception, apprehension, a taking. To perceive, understanding, a taking cognizance, intuitive or direct recognition of some innate quality. So these are the senses that this entry says this word, perception, has taken on over the years. Would you say that all of these particular senses are related, or are they not? Are they somehow contradictory? Words often can have directly opposite meanings of themselves. So, what is I think of the word. I don't. Oh, I mean, I feel like I want to do like clean, like to clean, but I'm trying to think of how can clean mean dirty, and it can, I'm sure, but apparently my perception uh, system is not wanting to pull out words that have the opposite meanings from themselves. Though I do know there is a significant amount. That should be an episode for sure. Ascent, descent, no. Aspect, effect. These are strange words, but not necessarily the type of word I'm thinking of. That is fine. If that seemed like a very random tangent, I do like to remind you that language is pretty much a collection of random tangents. So, part of the reason that it feels like we go a lot around in circles in these conversations is because there is a sense that the way that we personally perceive the world, the way that we take in information, the way that our senses influence our understanding of the world, all of those things are influenced by the next piece of information that we receive. It's all cumulative. And so when we receive a new piece of information, our system, our perception system, kind of has to go through a little bit of a check. Does this match or not match my understanding of how I relate to the world, how the world makes sense to me? And when there is a piece that changes the world, the way that we perceive the world, well, suddenly our former solid knowledge has to be sort of re-examined again with this new piece of information. And each piece of knowledge should have an impact on how we perceive the world. It influences how we interpret things. Our experiences relate to how we interact with the world. And so, perception. The way that our senses influence our perception of the world is entirely individual. Each one of us has different color cone shapes and sizes. And so each one of us has likely a different understanding of what the shades of color are around us. We may still have similar or very, very close delineations between colors, but because of our personal physical experience of growing up and, living in this world, our cones and rods are unique to us. And so are the colors that we perceive. And perhaps that is why people have favorite and not so favorite colors. Doesn't mean you have to, hate the colors that you don't like or the people that like those colors. It does make sense, though, that we would have preferences and dislikes because each one of us has different ways of experiencing the world. I have talked previously about the way that my particular perception system takes in light and sound a lot more intensely than many people in our society. And so I have had to create systems to interact with the external world so that I can feel comfortable with the intensity of how my senses perceive things. And it's nice that now more people are understanding that that is a very uh, benign and even should be welcome accommodation that we can give to each other. Each of us has different ways of perceiving the world. And I think that if we embrace that concept, we can maybe enjoy hearing about and experiencing each other's perceptions a little bit more openly. Well, look at the time. I think for me, for you, that's all the linguistics you can use this week. I hope this discussion on the facets of perception helps you get out there and have some fun crafting sound meaning. And once again, a personal invitation from me, your host, Sonatina. I would love to hear your interests around how words create our world. Is there a particular area of language that you're interested in exploring that you think has an impact on how you perceive the world? Or maybe you're curious about an aspect that you think other people are using to perceive that you just are very confused about. Let me know. Put a comment down below or send me a tweet at soundmeaning or send me an email craftingsoundmeaning.com. I look forward to hearing from you and I shall see you in next week's